Any of you ever been in a situation that you just cannot get out of? It's like whatever it is holding you captive and you can't even get away from it. Man, I wonder how that feel. Lieutenant William O, he gonna let us know what he saw on that gruesome day. That horrible, horrible, horrible night. Recently, while in my office in Louisville, Kentucky, I was pondering on the dullness of life in particular, of a detective's life, when a question was put on to me by a friend who had dropped in. By the time the fingerprint man had arrived, I had noticed imprints on most of the instruments, and I set the men to work. The rest of the men had been looking over the house. A small garage in the rear, they had found several guns, both revolvers and automatics, and a lot of ammunition. I was anxious to talk to Mr. Heaton and to direct the search for the men who had done the shooting. So leaving Lieutenant Jim in charge, I returned to the headquarters accompanied by Miss Heaton. I had seen enough to realize that this was going to be extraordinary case. This was going to be crazy. When we arrived at the office, Captain A. Clark Larkland, then Chief of Detectives, was there. He started asking questions like, I told him what I had seen and the little I had knew. Then he called Mr. Heaton into the office. She was very pale, and considering what she had been through, seemed to have a pretty good hold on herself. It was a little hard for her to start, but after a bit, she began to talk. She told us that she had eloped with Mr. Heaton some 8 years before, when she was only 15 years old. They seem to have lived a happy life and normal life up until the spring of 2 years ago. Suddenly and without warning, she told us her husband began to accuse her of being intimate with Bill Gates, whom they had both known since childhood. And I ain't talking about the billionaire. I'm talking about the broke Bill Gates that lived at 6737 something in Louisville, Kentucky. That's who I'm talking about. At times, Miss Heaton said his inner manner, the things he said almost became unbearable. Of course, she denied his accusations about Heaton without any cause or reason, continued to berate her. This state of affairs continued for 4 years, in effect, up until the day before shooting. About 4 weeks before, Heaton had brought a woman detective to his crib, Miss Jenny Moore of Chicago. Her duties were to accompany Miss Heaton wherever she left the house, to answer all telephone calls and prevent Miss Heaton from using the telephone herself. While I am the subject of Miss Moore, I might add that her sworn statement, voluntarily given us a few days later, verified everything Miss Heaton had told us that night. Miss Heaton was growing paler. I asked her if she did not want to rest a few minutes. She shook her head like, nah. Asked if she might have a glass of water and continued her story though. On Tuesday, her husband rented a house on 34th Street for the express purpose of taking Gates there and punishing him. Oh, what the fuck Gates do? I could see that it had taken a lot of effort on her part to make the admission. I was powerless to prevent my husband from carrying out his plan, Miss Heaton said. You see, I was particularly held a prisoner in my own home. Friday, the day before the shooting, her husband came home. He told his wife that he still had Gates, but he laughed when he told me about it, and I was frightened more than ever. Ooh, he kidnapped Gates for that vagina. Saturday afternoon, Mrs. Heaton, not having heard from her husband since the day before, and before being almost frantic with worry, finally slipped away from Mr. Moore, called a cab, and drove to the house where Gates was held captive. Her husband met her at the door, told her to come in, and cautioned his wife to be quiet. He looked terrible. Miss Heaton said he seemed to be under a terrible strain and plainly showed lack of the night's sleep. I felt sorry for him and told him so. He only laughed. I asked him if he had Bill Gates upstairs, and he said yes, and I have given him the scare of his life.
I bet he won't bother either of us again. Miss Heaton begged her husband to let his prisoner go and give up his mad plan. Heaton absolutely refused to listen. They talked a few minutes, and then Heaton said he had to go back upstairs. He like, fuck all that. I ain't even trying to talk no more. I have to watch Bill constantly for fear he might get
So he got Bill upstairs, you know what I'm saying? Like, you ain't hitting mine again. You ain't mashing my wife again. You feel what I'm saying? Wife like, nah, please let him go. Please let him go. He like, nah, I ain't trying to hear that. I gotta go watch him before he, you know I'm scared. He escape and start tripping and, you know, bust me upside the head and get away. It was about 6:30 p.m. on Saturday night, 6 years ago, March 8th, 1924 was the date. If I remember rightly, that we received a call at the Louisville Police Department headquarters. A man has been shot, the voice over the telephone shouted. You will find him at 637 South 34th Street. That's in the hood. 1924. Accompanied by several of men, I reached the scene in records time. We found a body on the second floor in the bedroom. It was lying near a mattress, a circumstance odd in itself because that mattress was lying on the floor. Surrounding the mattress were 4 steel staples driven into the floor. No one missed the picture it created, together with a number of surgical instruments that were in the room also. Not much more than a glance showed us that the man was dead. There was a gaping hole in his neck, another near his heart, several piercings where the room, and as is usually the case, they were incoherently babbling words about the killer. He had raced from the house, they said, when he made sure on a doctor's word, in fact, that his victim was dead. On the killer's wrist were handcuffs. His body was trembling, his face pale. There's not much use in telling all the minor details. Here are the main facts as we ascertained them by rapid questioning. The dead man was Richard Heaton, 33-year-old partner in a preponderance brokerage concern and a well-known and reputable citizen of Louisville, Kentucky. His home was on South 1st Street, where he lived with his charming and beautiful wife and his 2 children, a boy and a girl, both in the elementary grades of public school. Richard Heaton. His wife, who was related to a very wealthy Louisville man, was in the room and was a doctor, H.E. Schoonover, who happened to be in the neighborhood at the time of the shooting. This house was the good residential section of Louisville. Mr. Heaton, who retained her composure with admirable fortitude, told us that William Gates, her husband, a lifelong friend, had been done shooting. At once obtained a description of Gates, and she was all distraught and went across the street to use the telephone. I called headquarters and gave the sergeant what information I had. A hunt for Gates was immediately instituted. I'm gonna find Gates' ass. Yeah, he think he got away. Returning to the house, I found that a crowd had gathered about, that my men were having difficulty in preventing the curious from entering. I went back upstairs. Mr. Heaton was still kneeling beside her husband's body. That motherfucker was cold. She said something that made me pinch myself to make sure I was not dreaming. She said her husband had held Gates a prisoner for 2 nights, 2 days. He was chained to the floor in this room. She told us at once the significance of the mattress on the floor and the staples dawned on me. Never will I forget that room, its contents. Obviously, you know, this dude, he was on some crazy tie you up and keep you type stuff. You feel what I'm saying? But look, check this out. He tied up another man and he was married. So let's continue on with this story, because it's kind of weird, man. I don't know what's going on with these people. So people been weird since the early 1900s, probably before that. We found a surgeon's knife, several pairs of forceps, a hemostat, about a dozen suture ligatures, 2 or 3 instrument trays, a surgeon's apron, rubber sheets, and rubber gloves. There were a quantity of bandages, medicated gauze, absorbent cotton, disinfectant, and a large can of chloroform, a complete outfit for performing an operation like a doctor. He was performing some miracles out here at 637 South 34th Street. You feel what I'm saying? Louisville, Kentucky. Oh my God, this is scary. The man who had planned the operation apparently had also planned to remove a body. In case his victim died, he had provided 3 large watertight boxes, a large butcher knife, and a very sharp hatchet. He also found a quantity of sulfuric acid. In all, it was about as gruesome as a sight anyone who cared to see. In 2024, they would love to see that shit, man. They would go, man, they would like put it on camera and then sell it on World Star. Look, oh, ha, ha, ha. Look at dog, he tied up. He look, he got staples in him. This what they do nowadays, man. This shit crazy as hell. I guess he had been gone about 2 or 3 minutes when suddenly I heard a voice say, "Don't shoot me." It was hardly more than a whisper, and then I heard 2 shots, pow, pow, fired in rapid successions. As I stared it up the stairs, why the hell you going up the stairs to the gunshots? I don't know. Bill Gates came running down. He called and asked who were there, and I replied, Mary Lee. He didn't stop. As he passed me, he said, "I have shot Dick, and I am going for a doctor." Mrs. Heaton was nervously twisted her purse. Her voice was hardly above a whisper. I was afraid she was going to faint. I fetched her another glass of water, and in a moment she seemed to be all right. I continued upstairs, she said, and found my husband in the rear bedroom lying near the mattress. Just as you first saw him, he was breathing and trying to say something. I couldn't understand what the hell he was trying to say. In a few minutes, some man came in and told us he was a doctor. He looked at Dick. I asked him if he wanted to, like, maybe kind of fondle it before it dies. He said he didn't think so. Just then, Bill called from downstairs and asked the doctor the same question. Miss Heaton, she made arrangements with the doctor to call her family physician and have her husband taken to the hospital. Then another man came in. She continued. He looked at Dick and said he was dead. Yo, Dick dead, bro. Just then I heard Bill again call downstairs. The man called back and told him my husband was dead. Wait, hold up. Am I reading this right? I haven't seen or heard from Bill since. I knelt down and kissed his dick. I didn't know what to do, so I just sat there by his side. I know police officers are supposed to be hard-hearted and all that sort of thing, but I must admit that I never felt so sorry for anyone as did for this woman. I hated to do it, and I know the captain felt the same way, but we had to question her. There were several things that were not clear, and of course, her story had to be checked. We had let her tell her story without interruptions, going about it as gently as possible. And after about 5 minutes, of course, examination, we both convinced she had told us all she knew and that she had told us both the truth. I was Miss Hidden. She'd go and have one of my men take home in a cab. Then we had some good news. Heaton's business partner was in the outer office and wanted to see the chief. He was brought in at once. Without doubt,
he would throw new light on the case. He told us that his name was William E. Fisher and that he was a member of the firm of Eaton and Fisher and merchandise brokers of Louisville. He had heard about the murder and wanted to tell us all he knew about the affair. According to Fisher, Eaton for some time past had been acting queerly. He told his partner that several men were trying to break up his home. For the last year, he had neglected business, remained away from the office for long periods of time, and failed to let his partner know where he was or how long he intended staying. Fisher had tried in every way possible to get Heaton to attend to business, but Heaton had refused to listen to him. Early in February, he had told Fisher there is only one man left, and as soon as I have attended to him, all my troubles would be over and I would return to office. Fisher knew about the house Heaton and rented in the West End. Heaton told him about it and said he was going to take the man there and scare him to death. I want to impress on his mind that he is never to cross my path again, Heaton had told his partner. Fisher had begged him to give up any such plan. I told him that it was dangerous and that he was only going to get himself in trouble. He refused to listen and told me if I ever breathed a word to anyone else about my plan, I would have to answer to him. And I was terrified. We were interrupted. Officer had brought into headquarters a man who they believe answered Gates' description. He was in the outer office. I rushed out. It wasn't Gates. The poor fellow was half scared to death. He had red hair. Gates had brown hair. I gave those pallid men several different brands of call down and returned to the chief's office. Fisher resumed his story. He said that on a Friday, Conrad brought him a note from Heaton requesting Fisher to come to the 34th Street address. That afternoon, I interrupted Fisher long enough to find out where Conrad lived and learned that he was an organist in one of the downtown theaters. I sent a couple of men out to pick Conrad up and bring him to office headquarters. I went down Friday afternoon, Fisher said, hoping to bring Dick to his senses. He looked terrible. I could see he was very nervous and laboring under a stream. He told me that he had no sleep for 3 days and asked me to stay there in the house while he went home and got some sleep. This I refused to do. He then asked me if I would stay while he was home and saw his wife. He promised he would only be gone about a half an hour. He begged so hard that I finally agreed. He took me upstairs. He left. I guess he went and smashed his wife. In the back room, lying on a mattress, his arms and legs tied to the floor, a cover over his face, was a man. Dick he had put the cover over the man's face because his prisoner was ashamed of what he had done and did not want his identity known. He assured me that the man was secretly tired and could not get loose, then left. So he tied the man up to torture him, give him a little torture. You ain't gonna be messing with what's mine. You feel what I'm saying? So, yeah, so she telling her story. Yeah, that's crazy. After he had gone, I noticed the man was moving as if he were trying to ease his evidently aching muscles. I asked him if I could do anything for him. He didn't answer, so I just sat there. In about 30 minutes, I heard Dick come in, and I went upstairs. I again begged him to let the man go. I told him he was sure to get into trouble. He laughed at my fears and assured me again that I am only giving him a good scare and am not going to harm him in the least. While I was in a room upstairs, I saw I had a coat and I thought I was recognized. I asked Dick if the man wasn't Bill Gates. He said it might be and laughed. Then I pleaded with him and harder than ever. I would have done anything to keep Dick out of trouble. He wouldn't listen though. He asked me to come back that night. I told him I might and I left. As you see the story so far, as Fisher was telling it, was checking with the statement Miss Heaton had made. I don't know whether I mentioned it or not, but both the statements were made under oath. To continue with Fisher's story, after he left the house, he returned to the office, worrying all the while about Heaton. He decided not to communicate with the police, and as much as Heaton had assured him no harm would come to Gates, he determined instead to go back to the night, try once more to reason with his partner to give up his plans. I went down about 7 o'clock that evening Friday. There was no one there but Dick and the man upstairs. I argued with Dick for about an hour, but nothing I said seemed to have any effect upon him. He would only laugh and swear he was not going to harm his captive, only scare him. I gave up and started to leave. Just as I was going, I happened to look upstairs, and there, sitting on a bed in the room, handcuffed, his head in his hands, was Bill Gates. I became almost frantic with my pleading, but Heaton remained obdurate. So I left and went home and did not go back. Someone called me tonight and told me about the shooting. I am sorry I did not notify you yesterday of what was going on, but at the time I thought the best way out was to leave Dick alone. I feel as though I am responsible in a way for his death. Fisher had finished. I asked him if he had any idea how Gates had been captured, and he could figure out how Gates had an opportunity after 3 days of captivity to get hold of a gun. Those were 2 points in the case so far that we knew nothing about. Fisher couldn't help us on either one. After a few more questions, we thanked Fisher and told him he could get the hell on. Well, we were new, of course, who had done the shooting and the probable motive, but we're still without any trace of all the important Gates. I wondered at the time why, if it was a case of self-defense, Gates had run away. By now, we had got a little more information about our man. He was 31-year-old, a salesman employed by the Procter & Gamble Company, working out of Logansport, Indiana, where he lived with an aunt. He was very popular and well-known in Louisville, where he had formerly lived. I had on all the lines out and felt more we would have him before morning. The fingerprint man came in and reported that he had found Heaton's fingerprints all over the house, on the surgical instruments and on the revolvers, all which didn't help us much, except the strength of my belief at the time that Heaton had planned to carry on his plot alone. I studied the report carefully. The coroner called. He said Heaton had been shot twice, one ball piercing his neck, the other just above the heart. The shots had been fired from a .41 caliber gun, which accounted for the ugly wound. Still no word for Gates' whereabouts. Then the patrolman brought Conrad in. They had picked up just as he was leaving the theater where he was employed as an organist. Conrad couldn't tell us much, however. He had known both Heaton and Gates for both some time. The summer previous, he had made an extensive trip through the South with Heaton. Thursday, Heaton called him and asked him to come to his office about 6 o'clock that afternoon. When he arrived, Heaton introduced him to some man named Frank. He was told to go outside and wait in Conrad's car, and when Heaton left in his own, Conrad was to follow him. After Conrad had waited a while, 3 men came out, entered Heaton's car, and stared it off. Conrad followed. They drove down into the West End and stopped in the alley. The occupants of the first car got out, went into the house. Conrad followed. When Conrad got inside, the man Frank was in the living room. Heaton and the other man had disappeared. I asked Frank what was going on. He told me that Heaton had someone upstairs and who had stolen some stuff from him. He told me everything was all right and not to worry. About 10 o'clock, he came down and told Conrad to make Frank to the 10th Street Depot and buy him a ticket to Indianapolis and then go to the Willard Hotel and settle to bill for room 342. I took the man to the station, but did not go to the hotel. Conrad said I was worried about it all and went back to the house to see if I could find out what it all was about. He told Conrad that he had some man who had caused him some trouble, but that he shouldn't worry as he was just having a good old talk with him. Conrad said he spent the night there and the next morning told he was going to leave and not return. Conrad assured us that this was all he knew about the matter and that he had not been near the place since Friday morning. I didn't like the looks of things, he told us. He held Conrad and sent a man over to the hotel to check up on room 342 and the man Frank. Well, it was getting pretty late. We had a good line on the case, but where was our man, the man who had done the shooting? I certainly wanted to get him. I don't remember when I ever wanted a man so badly in my life. Pause. I left instructions that if Gates was picked up, I was to be notified at once and went home to bed the next day. And I knew the telephone was ringing. I received a welcome news that Gates had just given himself up and was then on his way to headquarters. I tore into my clothes and hurried uptown. Then I reached the office. Gates was there. He plainly showed out that he was under a terrible strain. He was very pale and nervous, but seemed more than anxious to talk. He told me that he had spent the night with relatives, and after talking the matter over with them, he had decided to give himself up. I was certainly glad to see him. While we were waiting for the secretary to arrive, the chief came in. He was as excited as a schoolboy, and so was that matter, for I felt we were soon to get the bottom of the whole mystery itself. The secretary came in. Gates was put under oath and told to go ahead. Here is his story. I had known Dick Heaton since our childhood. In fact, we grew up together and played together as youth. I did not know of his fears, his worries, his suspicions, or his plots. I had been away from Louisville for some time. Nothing, however, interfered with our friendship. Thursday night, 2 nights before the shooting, Dick called me over the phone and asked me to come to his office. There was nothing unusual about that, and I went. Just as I stepped in office, I was grabbed and was so sudden I couldn't move. I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing. I couldn't have gained any of my resistance because I could have been overpowered easily. I said nothing. I was taken to an automobile outside. A big man was watching me. He walked along by my side to the machine, but even if he had not been there, I could not have done much. I was handcuffed. The cuffs were placed on me as soon as I was grabbed. After a long ride, we went through an alley into a small garage. I was led to a house. Dick took me upstairs to a back room, and he tied me, and he went down again. While he was gone, I thought how unlucky I was to have lost my pistol. It had been taken from me before I was handcuffed. Dick came back after a while, and I could see he was bent on mischief. I had sized up all the instruments, the sharp hatchet, the boxes, and the rubber sheets. Get down, he commanded. I was forced to get on my knees. He then made me lie flat on the floor. He stretched my 2 legs apart and fastened my ankles to 2 staples, leaving me spread out on the floor. I saw him take down the chloroform. He then got a funnel. He placed some cotton in it and poured out the chloroform. All the while, he was calm as a man could be. He put the funnel upside down over my nose. I saw it coming and took a deep breath. After he put the funnel in place, I held my breath for what seemed hours. Man, he was on some torture shit. I wonder what dog do. I wonder what he steal from him. He must have stole something. He must have really stole something. Gradually, I relaxed and closed my eyes. My body and I tried to feign unconsciousness and apparently succeeded. He took the funnel away. In a moment, he unbuttoned my coat, then it dawned on me what kind of torture I was to undergo. I couldn't move. I was afraid to say a word. He unbuttoned my vest, the right side of it. I felt something hard glide down my side. Then I remembered it was my small pistol at the ringer that I had forgotten about until this time. They had overlooked it. This little pistol, not much bigger than a toy, brought renewed courage. I waited a very short time, and then I decided something had to be done at once. I began to mumble. Dick stopped over me and cooed to me like a baby, coaxing me to tell what I wanted to tell. Go on, tell me about it. Don't be afraid, he coaxed. I saw my chances. I mumbled he could make it out that I had written several letters. I told him I had said in the letters that Dick Heaton would be responsible for any harm that might befall me. I told him that I wrote to Dick Heaton mean the murder to me. He coaxed some more, and I told him I had sent the letters to my aunt in Logansport, Indiana, with whom I live, and instructed her to send them to police in the event anything happened to me. This stopped him. He buttoned up my clothes and left me presumably unconscious. You can bet I was mightily glad when he left. I didn't think I had long to live, but I didn't give up hope entirely. Friday afternoon, he brought Fisher, his business partner, into the room. At that time, I was lying on a mattress on the floor, arms and legs tied, and a cover spread over my face. Dick said he was going and left the room. Fisher said he would step out of the room and give me a chance to make myself comfortable. He thought I didn't want my identity known. I wasn't sure Heaton had gone. In fact, I thought he was standing outside the door. I knew he would kill me if he heard me talking, and I didn't want to run the risk of letting Fisher remove the cover from my face. I knew he wouldn't be able to think fast enough if Dick suddenly came in the door, so I said nothing. Friday night, Dick took me in an automobile to his office. He placed a pistol at my side and told me to call my aunt in Logansport and tell her to send the letters to Heaton and Fisher's broker's office in Louisville. My aunt must have thought I was crazy, for I had not written any such letters. However, I obeyed instructions. After that, I was taken back to my prison. Saturday, I thought all along that my day had come. Dick would come into the room and look at me. I would pretend I was asleep. Then he would go over and start fingering the instruments, and all while kind of smiling to himself. My nerves were near the breaking point. That night I told him he'd take me to the washroom. I told him I couldn't stand it any longer. He agreed. When we returned, he prepared to chain me to the staples. He had to unlock my handcuffs, and I saw that my chance had come. I got my ringer from my vest pocket and pointed at him. Put it up, Dick, I commanded. Don't waste any time. His face changed in an instant and became chalky white. His eyes got wild. He grabbed his gun and I let go worth both barrels. He spun around and fell. Then I knew I was free, and I raced from the room and downstairs, taking there 3 steps at the time, and hollered, "Who's there?" I had heard a door open sometime before Heaton's wife answered. I didn't stop. I ran out the house as far as I could. As I ran out the front door, I saw a man and told him I had shot someone. I told him not to say anything. This all comes back to me now. I started running down the street. Then I thought of my hat and coat. I ran back to get my shit and started running again. All the time I thought something in my brain would crack. I was looking for it anytime I thought I was going insane, and I ran all the faster. I remember now that the loose handcuffs was daping on my side hut. I didn't even try to conceal it. I didn't know what was in my mind. All I seemed capable of doing was to run, and I did that. I got on a street car and rode a couple of blocks, then I got off. Nobody asked me any questions. I couldn't have any answered them they did. My mind was at a standstill. Finally, after running myself out of breath, I started for Harold Creek, where I was visiting my father-in-law. Finally got home, and after resting a bit and after talking it over with some of my relatives, I saw my mistake in running away. I made arrangements to surrender at once. No matter how long I live, I would never forget the experience. It was too horrible, too cruel for words. I had read of such plots and plans in dime novels, but I never expected to be the victim of parts I knew I can never put in from my mind. But now that it is over, I am confident for being freed and shall attempt to forget all the possible can. I am sorry. I had to kill Dick, but I had to do it to save my life. I had been a detective quite for a few years, but during my time, I had never heard anything like the story Gates had just finished. It was unreal. We let him rest for a while, then we started our questioning. First and foremost, we wanted to know why he wasn't suspicious of Heaton. He had carried 2 guns when he went to the broker's office. He told us we had a hobby for guns and was the habit of carrying one. We found out later that day that was correct and that we had purchased a good many guns during the last 2 or 3 years. The chief and I went at him pretty hard for about 2 hours. We were convinced he was telling the truth. Of course, we had to put us under arrest, charging him with murder. Thus, you have the statement of the principal characters of this remarkable story. Imagine, if possible, the mental strain Gates was put through. For 2 long, insufferable days, afraid to close his eyes for fear it would be for the last time, expecting his friend suddenly turn foe to operate on him at any moment. Is it any wonder that he thought after he had Heaton and escaped, he was going crazy? Bill Gates was arraigned in court Monday morning, May 12, 1924, and released on bail. He was subsequently dismissed, the police court judge ruling that he had killed Heaton in self-defense. A coroner's jury also absolved him from all blame. Conrad was held to the grand jury charged with being an accomplice to the kidnapping. He bought Cordell back. His part wasn't very important. He had known Heaton as Peter Brooks and had been told by Heaton that I want you to help me get a man who has been stealing from me. Cordell admitted helping capture Gates when he came to Heaton's office and accompanying them to the house. He left the night for Indianapolis, and that was about all we knew about the affair, he said. Conrad's case was finally dismissed. Cordell received a 60-day jail sentence for his part in the affair, and thus the case was closed and the torture house tragedy ended. What a story. Full of suspense, full of drama, full of action. Peace. The Torture House.